business professionals want to quickly commoditize and create utilization information about their projects and the work they're doing. And they're missing the idea of a prima donna industry, an industry where creative must win and creative comes first. And there's a thought process of how to win and be able to make gigantic, successful creative projects, but also make them creative, productive, and profit successful.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel Petitpas. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. Today, I'm excited to be joined by a new friend of mine. We met in Atlanta at MYOB, Mind Your Own Business, which was a conference put on by David C. Baker. We both shared the stage at that event. We shared a very deep and nerdy dialogue at a breakout table and became fast friends over dinner the following night. And so he's here from RevThink to walk us through really the framework that he uses to help clients get clear on where their money's going and what to do to change that trajectory and, create more cash flow, more profit, more thriving for business ownership. So with all that, Tim Thompson, thank you for making the time to join us on the show today.
Marcel, thanks for letting me be here. It is kind of funny when you meet somebody at a conference, you don't really know who you're going to come across or how you get along with people. And often conferences have a lot of creative people looking for business answers. So to find somebody that can collaborate on the business side, as you said, we could geek out a little bit on some of the technical side, but it's great to collaborate with you and be part of this conversation.
I'm excited that you're here, and we certainly can get into some rabbit holes. So I'm going to do my best not to let us get too far down so we can stick to the main track. But before we do any of that, I want to make sure you have an opportunity in your own words to describe who you are and what you do at RevThink.
Oh, yeah, sure. My name is Tim Thompson. My company is called RevThink. We've been in business for just about almost 19 years this year. So going strong towards 20 years. I actually came from Hollywood production. I myself was a producer. And most notably from opening credit sequences to films. In the late 90s, a group of people and I, that's what we were most known for, had a wonderful, great time being part of that process, sitting in rooms with the likes of Ridley Scott and David Fincher and Steven Spielberg is not bad for your career as you get things going. But there was a trend happening in the industry and more people were starting new studios. And I was being asked more and more complicated questions of, what's it take to run a business, or how do I do this, or can you help me with some other complicated issue? And I went from freelance problem solver to consultant around 2006 timeline. Since then, I've been helping studio and agency owners run their businesses from all likes, all different parts and segments of the industry, and from all over the world. Currently, we now have a community of about 750 small business owners, creative studio owners from 60 different countries. So our reach now is pretty big and our community is going strong, solving those same problems and kind of getting that familiarity with one another. That business ownership can be pretty lonely. So it's nice to talk to others and collaborate with others, as you and I learned at the conferences together. Yeah.
Awesome. So, and of course, we'll have some links in the show notes to RevThink, what they're doing, the community, if you want to go learn more about that and check that out. Now, with all that said, one of the things that I really admire about you, Tim, is that you understand strategically, tactically, what it takes to successfully scale an agency. You've helped lots of your clients do that, and you've been in the weeds, but you've also played more of the stepping back coaching role and everything in between. But you also are deep in the weeds on the financial and metric side. And that's a rare combination. You often kind of find skill in one or the other, but it's rare that you find both. And I think that's part of the reason that we really kind of hit it off at the conference was, that you cover that wide spectrum. So I'm really excited to dig into our conversation today. So with all of that said, what are some of the things that, clients come to you with that you're finding your clients are struggling with? and the symptoms that tell you, hey, this is the kind of person that, you help at RevThink?
Yeah, most creative entrepreneurs, what they're actually looking for is freedom, right? They want to be able to make choices of which projects they want to work on, how, the amount of effort or creative effort they want to put into those projects, what team members to bring on. They really are looking to have a creative career where they make a mark with the work product that they're putting out there. And there's this thing that holds them back, they feel, which is like finances. They feel like there's always a limit, right? Time or money are the limits. So they want you as a business owner to stay within that time and budget parameters so they can be profitable as a business owner, or at least be sustainable as a business owner, but also almost destroy all the rules it takes to get that project done successfully, because they creatively want to push against that and break all those rules. I feel like a lot of outside business professionals want to quickly commoditize and create utilization information about their projects and the work they're doing. And they're missing the idea of a prima donna industry, an industry where creative must win and creative comes first. And there's a thought process of how to win and be able to make gigantic, successful creative projects, but also make them creative, productive, and profit successful. So that's the beginning of my journey as a consultant, was trying to find a pathway and a communication style with these business owners, so they understand I'm not holding them back. I'm actually investing in them and getting return on investment and growth potential and security as they do it.
So, okay, there's a quick tangent here that I would love to go down with you, because you presumably have lived through this transition. You have this thesis that the industry was like just dominated by time and materials for so long that so much of the thinking, the methodologies, the technology, the accounting methodologies, the professional services automation platforms, like they all kind of became very hard coded to this assumption that everything was always going to be time and materials, time tracked, time billed, utilization rates, whatever. But then over the last 20 years, we've seen that erode. And now it is, not even the majority of the billing models that we see in firms. And so, of course, this new world that we're living in, where most firms have multiple billing models, complex staffing systems with freelancers and contractors and white label partners and full-time people and part-time people all over the world, it's complicated, it's nuanced. And then to your point, you have often within that same firm a productized service right next to a highly customized creative endeavor that is impossible to scope. And so it just requires a different way of thinking. And I think, to your point, challenging the conventional wisdom. So I guess the question I'm asking is like, do you feel similarly about how the industry has changed? What was your experience like kind of watching the industry go through what I think is a pretty massive shift over especially the last 20 years?
Yeah. I mean, right. You're calling it time materials. The word we used in was cost plus, right? So when I was at RGA, the work that we're doing almost worked like a law firm. Like you could put whatever hours you wanted to against a project, then you just passed on those hours plus, something else to the client. And you're really just helping your client burn their money. It wasn't that there wasn't any parameters, but every hour you worked was going to be covered. You just filled in timesheets and did it. That's the like Mad Men era of marketing, right? That big Fifth Avenue walk-ups and everyone looking so fancy and having tons of cash. The reality is that the digital evolution actually put a capability in everyone's hand. So immediately the industry wanted to commoditize that and really get flat rate bids from, we'll call that outsource work. Agencies would get the work and then they'd pass it off to somebody on a flat bid and keep all the profits. So that's the first round. And a lot of studio and agency owners today kind of have adopted a system in that era where they have accepted the flat bid and really try to work against it and then make all the math fit within it. I like to say, like, you have to get the shoe in Cinderella's foot inside of that shoe somehow, right? Like you actually kind of have to fit it all in there to make it work. And that's where the complications began, because I still want to have all the creative ability and actually make something really gorgeous on behalf of my client. But I also need to stay for health reasons on my own business, stay within those parameters. And that's the beginning of that pressure that took place. So trying to open that back up again, I think a big trend, like David C. Baker, the conference we went to, would talk a lot about a value proposition instead of time and materials proposition, so that you're asking for a higher and higher price for the work you're doing. That was a new language, a new way of breaking through. And now 20 years later, it's even been pushed again up against the wall one more time, where the systems that we're working with and the technology we're working with are really, really creating fast deliverables. So even that value proposition and those work hours aren't being accepted as high of value as they used to.
Yeah. So massive mindset shift, certainly a massive shift in terms of how we transact with clients. And that, of course, cascades into changes in terms of how we think about finance and operations and time tracking and project management, and how all that stuff ladders up to, are we making money? Do we have the right staff levels? Like the day-to-day conversations that you need to be having to your point, make the business make sense so that you can then also fulfill those objectives that you have for creative fulfillment and pushing the envelope, et cetera. So the thing that you're touching on here is this tension, frankly, that a lot of founders feel between their creative and aspirational desires to have an impact, to do great work, to push the envelope, to rebel against the establishment, et cetera. And then the need to be fiscally responsible enough to make payroll and have a profit and earn the ability to keep doing this thing. So when a client comes to you feeling that tension, how do you then start to diagnose, what's going on and what they need to do to get to that place?
Yeah, that the thinking that we have to kind of process through is one that freedom is still available, right? If the business owner still is looking for the opportunity to do the projects they want to, or produce the projects that they believe has the best creative output, and they want to be known for the creative person or the creative output or the strategist, right? It doesn't always have to be creative. It can be a very smart strategic move. Some sort of big movement or big product push has the same desire as a business owner. We're pushing up against some sort of like reality. A few years ago, I was working with a conference, and they wanted me to put on a 2-day seminar that they were going to upsell some of the attendees, and I wanted to title it "Guaranteeing Profits." And the conference pushed back and said, "You can't call it guaranteeing profits because you can't guarantee profit." And I said, "Well, yes, you can. You just spend less than you make. That's profit, right?" So, but I can understand the tension of a creative conference saying, wait a second, if you're saying that, it's really like, can you guarantee you can hold back that creative person from overspending, right? So that's the work that we need to do, is like, how do we get into decision making that you understand that when you make a certain decision, it has impact? And then how do you understand that impact so you can recorrect it? Most business owners are very smart and actually just want to have a feedback loop. So when they make a certain decision, that their systems and routines within the business allow them to recalculate. The theory we use is almost like playing golf, right? I can start at the tee box and I can see where I'm trying to hit, but I'm going to have 3 or 4 hits till I get anywhere near the green. And if you're me, it takes you 9 more times to putt until you actually get in the hole. Each hit means you have to recalculate. And projects work the same way. Like, you just start off, you've made a promise. There's a lot of pressure to deliver to. You made that promise, you take those first strokes and you're getting closer and closer, but each one takes a recalculation. Well, a creative project wants that same desire. Tell me where I am now. Tell me what it's going to take to get there. Let's talk about the effort and see if we can't, as we get closer, kind of build up the cycle so we get those answers there. So there is math and calculation that we do, but really if we flow that down from just math and desire and purpose down to like strategic and visible understanding of where we are in a project, that visibility allows for new decision makings, and you can keep your team on track.
I love this thought because it's like the entire philosophy behind what we're doing at Parakeeto as well, which is that feedback loop is critical, but it's really actually really nuanced to create. And it's nuanced for a whole bunch of reasons. The first is that it exists at kind of these different apertures in the business. There's like the high level decisions of like, do I hire someone? Do I fire someone? Compensation, overhead structures, like the broad-based business decisions. But then it also exists at a tighter kind of vector, which is specific clients, specific projects, even maybe deliverables or milestones within a project. And all of these things are interconnected, but creating a mathematical formula that allows you to say, oh, I'm going to poke this, and then I want to see what the end result is. there's a black box there that so many people struggle to work through, and they struggle because it's really complicated, actually. And even you and I, who have been doing this for a long time, like, there are nuances that we might not agree on, but we probably both still get to the right outcome because we've still considered the whole picture and made all the necessary adjustments downstream so that it results in a good output, and it results in a feedback loop that makes sense, to your point.
Yeah, I find one of the big hurdles is language. You know, if I use all this technical CPA language, one, people already assume that they know what it means, right? And also, they don't want to know what it means because it feels like it's someone else's job than theirs. So by just taking the same principles and changing the language, then you can get a different understanding. So for example, I use this thing called the splits. And it starts off very easy with a project. As soon as a project comes in-house, let's split the money. And I split into two categories, a direct area and an indirect area. Direct meaning costs directly related to the project, and indirect are costs indirectly related to the project. If you're using old type of thinking, the salary fits only in one or the other of those categories. The salaries can't be spread between those two areas. But I don't care. I reshuffled it and I said, listen, I don't care if you're salary or not. If you're an editor working directly on projects, you're a direct cost. If you're in operations or working as an office manager, you're indirect cost. Salary, freelance, doesn't matter. And just by reshuffling those numbers allows people to understand the impact and visibility on where their money's going. And now they have control over it. From the very beginning, when they bid the project, give it to the client, start choosing how to spend money internally, and then on a person-by-person basis, understand strategically who needs to be on the project for how long so they meet that number. Also, the important part is when to push back against the client. That client has asked for more and more work within the same budget. That doesn't work. And we can recalculate and recognize when we're going to hit the mark and go back to that client and easily explain to them that work. So just language, approach, and approaching it the same way you make decisions or the same way you work is a big, huge breakthrough. And a lot of those systems, all that stuff that you get online just didn't have that visibility. It's QuickBooks, accounting systems, or some sort of time tracking system that just utilizes creates utilization of everybody. I wanted something in the middle. So that's my invention. And quite honestly, I think that's when you and I connected, was we were using different words, but the same methodology to get to the end product.
Yeah. That was such a funny thing, right? So just, for everyone's context, like, I hosted a breakout during breakfast on one of the days of the conference, and it was about profitability. And Tim turned up. We had never met. Tim is an expert in this stuff. He doesn't really know who I am. So he sits down and we just start basically debating about some of these concepts. But it's so funny because so much of it, to your point, was just we use a word like gross margin. And then it's okay, well, we just assumed that we were both talking about the same thing, but then we actually weren't. And it took several rounds to get to the fact that oh, actually, yeah, we kind of agree on this thing. I think we're kind of saying the same thing. We're using different words. And this was a big part of the reason why I started calling it delivery margin, for example, because I was really sick of getting into an engagement with a client and then wasting an hour of the client's time because I had to argue with their accountant for an hour about some semantic issue that had nothing to do with what we're trying to accomplish, just because they thought gross margin should be measured some other way. And it's honestly, I don't care. What I care about is that your client needs to run their business, and this is a concept that's important to them. And I think you have had that same experience. But the thing I admire about how you've also approached language definition, which I hadn't really considered deeply until we talked about it, was the impact it has on the client, who, to your point, is often a creative and is adverse and maybe has had a negative experience or has created a negative association with a lot of these very technical financial terms. And so by creating a separate set of language, you can both get around those semantic arguments that are largely a waste of time, and also create a conversation that feels more approachable, more human, easier to connect with for that creative entrepreneur that just wants to run the business and do great work and carry on.
And here it's a funny one, right? So this is probably the most common approach that I have with people is inside their business, they're mostly considering what you would call gross profit, right? Which is, hey, the amount of money left over after project costs have been accounted for. And they simply, a business owner, in all sincerity, just ask their producers, hey, make about 40% profit. And they mean only spend 60% of the money on the direct costs and leave a lot of money left over. That's what they're asking for. But imagine asking basically a complete stranger, hey, leave 40% profit left over. That person goes, well, listen, it's profit. If it's 38% profit or 41%, like it's just profit. It's fluffy when you use that term. Well, some people have such a great big spread because this word profit is just making somebody think like it's all free money. 5% can be a big difference for a business owner, right? It can be a huge difference. But if I said, listen, it's still profit, right? 35% is still profit. And business owners believe it also. Yeah, that sounds like profit to me. Let's just call it profit. Reality is like, it doesn't. So what I do in my splits is say to them, hey, here's the 3 calculated areas, right? You have your direct costs. Those are somewhat dynamic. You can choose that on a project by project basis, no problem. You have these indirect costs. They're somewhat static. Like you can't choose your insurance and rent on a project by project basis. Those are kind of locked in. So if you add your direct and your indirect together, your profit is really honestly in a 3 or 4 or 5% category for a lot of people when I get started. Now we try to get that up to 15, 20%, which is actually very easy when you start showing people how to make the decisions. But they have to be able to see how much money is actually left over. And then you start teaching your production team or your project managers where the money actually goes, and people become very careful with it. Now that person has a 1 or 2% variable on a project, not a 35% variable on a project by project basis. That's the biggest difference, and one of the biggest issues that business owners have that we solve, straight off working with them.
Do you want some free resources to help you measure and improve your profitability? If you do, then I want to tell you about our agency profitability toolkit, which you can grab absolutely free in the show notes or by heading to parakeeto.com/toolkit. It's packed with training videos, cheat sheets, templates, and all kinds of other great resources to help you start measuring and improving the essential metrics that are going to drive better profitability in your business. And it's helped thousands of other agencies around the world do the same. So I want to encourage you to go and grab a copy of that. And if you'd rather get in the fast lane and just have our team of experts guide you through the process of measuring and improving your profitability, then I want to encourage you to apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. And with that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll let you get back to it. So that cascades nicely into the next thing I was going to get to. So it's like, if we zoom out a little bit, we kind of started talking about this question of where is the money going, right? And so if a person comes to you and they say, Tim, I just want to do amazing creative work, but I feel like this whole running the business, keeping it profitable thing is just kind of getting in the way. It's not going super well. Like, what is your process for working through that with them? And so, to me, it sounds like it starts with having a first look at, okay, well, where is the money going? Are you setting yourself up for success? And if not, what needs to change? But walk us through kind of what the fundamental analysis is there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pull back just one step just to put into context to my answer so it doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere. But as a consultancy, we actually deal with this thing called the 7 ingredients. It's the 7 areas of business that basically have to be in sync to run your business successfully. And these ingredients, they actually add up over time. And a less mature business only has to deal with 2 or 3 of them regularly. Maybe creative, production and sales are the primary ingredients. But ingredients like marketing, operations, finance, and entrepreneurship are ones that are more complicated. And as your business gets bigger, you add them. That's the complication you feel as a business owner. Also, as your business gets bigger, the speed at which you have to deal with these issues also increases. And I think that's why people call outsiders. They want to deal with something, but the speed at which they have to solve the problem, it's better to have somebody that doesn't have a process of worrying about decision making that they know from experience. They can help come in and start snapping these pieces together. So with that in mind, when you're looking at a financial picture, what you're really looking for, you're actually not trying to figure out where the money went or put parameters on it. I actually asked the question, where do you want your money to go? I want to look from now, January 2025, through all of 2025, looking forward and saying, let's make the roadmap. Let's decide today where all of our money is going to go for the next 12 months. And as revenue comes in, it's projected, but as revenue comes in, we can silo that into the correct areas, one of them being profit. So technically what I do with my team is turn profit into an expense. and almost make it one of the first expenses you take out of the project. So if you're going to make 15% project profit in your company, you have to take 15% off the top from the very beginning. That starts creating a different decision-making of what's left. So you become more critical of who is on your team and what you're doing with them. Because I work primarily in a creative industry, I firmly believe that necessity is the mother of innovation, and innovation is what we're all striving for. We want to invent something new. We want to put our creative minds at work. So I employ that creative mind to actually solve new problems by putting these parameters on the projects and then asking new questions. That's where innovation and technology start working together to help you improve things or create new looks or engage in new outcomes, because the pressure is allowing you to think differently about the project. But that's where I start. I actually want to start understanding where are we going to go as a business? What are our goals and ambitions, not just for the business, but also just your career and then also your life, right? All three things have to be within this project, and then start building a plan to make you successful that way. That when I align that first, I can see start with why right behind you on your bookshelf. When I put the why first, other things fall very simply into place, because we can always be in sync with why we're doing what we're doing, and then how we do it, and then where we're spending money, and so on as the work flows out there. Then, like you, I simply just program that back into the systems, production budgets, bids, cost rates, that kind of stuff, so that all of that stuff synchronizes, and every decision someone makes is in sync with the big picture decisions that they put up proactively at the beginning of the year.
There's a lot to be said about that exercise of saying, here's the outcome, therefore here's a set of constraints, and then having the conversation about, okay, well, what could we do to accomplish this outcome within these constraints? And doing that with someone that is able to also provide the input of the things that you might not have ever considered because you didn't even know that there were options, or levers that you never would have thought to pull because you kind of had never really thought through the implications of pulling those levers. That is such a powerful way to challenge someone to get their business structured in such a way that it's actually serving the outcome that they want for it, which is ultimately like the most important thing. We kind of have the same philosophy when we start working with a client, right? Is like, what do you want? Is your business capable of getting you there? And if not, let's start there, right? Because it's like, there's no amount of execution that's going to change the problem of you're planning to fail. And you just don't even know that that's the case, right? That's purgatory.
Well, it's also like mistaken generosity, right? There's so many business owners, when push comes to shove, they're willing to give up profit, give up their own personal lifestyle, and put their company in jeopardy. But in reality, by putting the company in jeopardy and giving up your own personal lifestyle and others, you're actually hurting the business. And that person that you think you're giving up for, your employees, these really important team that you've built together, are actually more and more in jeopardy, because they're not going to be employed if the business can't survive. So we just put the first things first out there so that we do understand where stability comes from and make the necessary decisions to keep it stable. The team you have does not need to be affected by these decisions at all. We just want to understand who this team is, what their values are when it comes to doing a project, and then go after those type of projects so that they stay employed and we're using their brain power and their working power to get things done. That's the opportunity we're looking for. We're actually trying to engage the creative mind, engage the creative spirit into this decision-making.
So, okay, that's kind of the first step broadly, is getting that understanding, setting the why, working backwards and saying, okay, what needs to be true? What are the constraints? From there, you talked about the 7 ingredients. Walk me through how, after that initial process, you start to determine, okay, what are the next steps that we need to take? And then reset that over time as you take down that challenge and look for the next one.
Yeah. So again, like I like to call it the first things first approach, right? So it's a great question, because there really is like, you can't take on everything all at one time. So if we're going to game plan and be proactive about where the money's going to go, or where the company is going to go, and then how we finance that company to make those decisions, keeping in mind that one of the biggest priorities is also legacy. So the team that you have, the careers that they're having, and the work product, the jobs you're doing are a big picture idea of what you're looking for in this career. we're actually putting the building blocks in place to make that successful. So when I look at it from a financial point of view, I actually want to ask the questions, hey, when we think about this growth that we're about ready to embark on, what are the team members we're looking for, and how do we understand who those team members are, so I can start adding that, salary or that expense into the projects. We might even want to be looking on a project by project basis, which freelancers we're using and how we understand those freelancers' value to see if there's a tipping point or when the tipping point is to put some logic in place with our current projects. So that's the big picture that we start with, build that roadmap. But we jump right into the thing we call the splits. I want to know what the direct and indirect expenses are on each project. And then immediately I have a system I call the production roll-up. The production roll-up is taking that bid that you have with the client and then creating those splits and that direct allocation to the producer. So we might say, hey, let's just say our splits are 50-50. A $100,000 project just came in-house. Here, producer, here's $50,000 to get that project done. The other 50% is reserved to profit and indirect costs. You can have this 50% to get the work done. They then rework the budget. This is the beginning of that golfing metaphor. They start reworking the budget so that everything fits within that $50,000. Now we're locked into profit and visibility on that project, and then everything's actualized against that. Now our internal rates are also calculated to full visibility. We do not add profit margin on top of piece post rates. I think that is such a bad practice. Or maybe even worse as a practice is giving everyone the exact same rate, regardless of what their job is or how much experience they have. So a junior designer is the same price internally as a senior animator. Guess who I'm choosing every time? I'm choosing the senior people because they cost the same as a junior person. Like, you're creating this utilization problem. So I create visibility into the ranks of anyone, freelancers or staff. And so producers can make, and creative directors can make the right decisions on who to use on the team to get the project done on time, on budget. You synchronize that stuff together, and then you, on a weekly basis, have a production meeting so that all the work everyone's doing can be reported very simply on a project or project roll-up. Really quick 20-minute meeting. Everyone go through the projects, asking the questions about how we're doing creatively on the project, number one priority, how we're doing with the relationship with the client, number two priority, and how we're doing profitability internally, number one priority on each project. With just that in mind, the system, that the things are in sync and that visibility is there, and the routine on a weekly basis, we build a heartbeat, and that heartbeat allows us to drive that business closer and closer and closer to the finish line. So that's how I do it. I like the system part of it and the routine part of it. It's actually why I love the work that you're doing, because I need a lot of visibility to analyze the data, don't I? And when the work that you guys are doing to give us those reports that we need so that our team can have that visibility, gain those insights and start making those decisions, that's amazing. The more visibility they have, the more they have to analyze and to win.
What I love about what you're describing, though, is that you really kind of do start with the most important thing, which is like the critical assumption that's made often several times a month, several times a quarter, that will dictate whether or not this business has any chance of survival, which is like, when I sell something to a client, am I setting the business up for success? Am I actually structuring that in such a way where the business has any chance at being profitable? And it is unbelievable the number of firms that we both talk to, I'm sure, that when you really double click on like, so, client asks you for a proposal, how do you arrive at that price? When you really dig into that question, there isn't a good answer. And there is no understanding of what the margin is expected to be. If there is a margin target, why that margin target, what's the bottom line that's expected to drive, what kind of costs is that expected to cover, right? All the things that you just talked about. That is like step one. Now, what I will say is, in my experience, I'm actually surprised at the number of firms that, once we kind of go through and do an analysis, they're actually not that far off from charging enough. Most often, the problem is one of two things, which is they're either just going way over budget on a lot of these things. And so what they think that they're charging, what they're actually charging, when you look at the feedback loop, is disparate, which I'm sure you run into a lot. Or projects are all actually very profitable, but they just have like a massive, utilization problem, for example. Or in some cases, they have an overhead problem. We rarely see that. That's only common in my experience in firms that had to downsize. and they just cut the wrong things. They kept all their senior staff in their fancy office, and they cut all the producers that make the money.
That's right. It's so interesting too. Of like, you probably have had this happen where we finally correct all the math. So we get an analysis of our costs correctly, what it costs us to do a project, freelancer, staff, overhead, and so on. We have our cost analysis done, and now we have to do a price analysis. What should we be charging our client? And the price analysis is very obvious. You have to be able to charge them enough for all of this math that we just did to work for the cost analysis. It's that simple. When we start getting into that pricing part of it, how many business owners say, "Oh, Marcel, I can't do that. My client would never pay that price," right? That's like one of the first things they do. So they're already immediately negotiating against themselves, already compromising what their profit's going to be because they believe that client's not going to pay it. So another thing I do as a consultant is stand next to them and help them walk through that new proposition of price with clients. One thing you can recognize is maybe you need different clients. Like if they can't afford who you are, it's time for you to graduate up. And that opportunity for growth that people hold back because they're afraid to ask for more money or go find another client that's willing to pay that money. They can't believe that's possible or true. It is nice having somebody that's walked through it in the past by your side, but it's possible for everyone. But also like just getting what you deserve is a big part of being in business and not negotiating against yourself. It's amazing how often your existing clients would be willing to pay a higher price or pay the same price they're used to and not get as many man hours or work product that they have to out of that same price. Both of those are negotiable items to still make the profitability work.
Yeah. That's such an important point because at the end of the day, like that is what entrepreneurship is going to market and figuring out a problem that can be solved and that creates a lot of value by being solved, and an efficient enough process to do that leaves like the majority of that value available to fund the operations of a business and leave a profit. And that is just hard. Like it's the reason entrepreneurship's hard. It's the reason you make a lot of money if you win and you lose a lot of money if you lose. And there's like 4% of businesses that actually figure this out to any reasonable amount of scale. And so like I think it's very true that most clients or our clients, most agencies could stand to charge more. And most of them would be successful in doing that if they just had the courage to ask. It's also true that sometimes they can't get paid what they need in order to do the best, most optimal process that they could ever want to do. And so that creates the other challenge, which is like, okay, then like figure out how to get more efficient. And like that is the game of business, is like, how do you maximize the value that you create and minimize the cost that you incur to create that value? And to the degree that you can stretch that gap, you create oxygen for the business and everything gets easier and you have a competitive advantage.
Yeah. And I'm an entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur. I hate it too, right? I hate the pressure I get from within the industry. I hate the pressure that I get from change that's happening or technological advances. It's also super exciting because no one has to give me permission to go do it. I don't have to ask permission by a boss or get approval through some ranking process to pursue something. I can pursue whatever I want to, for better or worse. Sometimes you can go off on tangents. But the entrepreneurial ingredient, the entrepreneurial edge that you have is one that allows for continual critical thinking. The hard part is that we're also taking on the larger burdens, right? So it's not just kind of keep my business going. It's that this business is part of my career. If I'm going to have legacy and purpose and creative results from it, be known for something else, I have to take on that burden as well. And even greater, I have to take on the burdens of life. Like my kids need to go to school. I need to retire someday. There are other things that have to be added. All this has to be added into this one business. If you're compromised for 10 or 12 years, just surviving as a business owner, you're actually giving up those bigger items, your career and your life, by what? Giving it to a corporation? Like, does Pepsi deserve your kid's education because you wanted to win that Pepsi project so bad? Like, of course they don't. They can afford to pay for your kid's education. They can afford to pay for your retirement. You just have to know how to set the price properly so that you can accomplish those goals. That's what's really important. And the bigger pieces of that entrepreneurial ingredient is understanding how all that comes together to accomplish your life goals as well.
A great way to reframe the why. And I'm sure we could do a whole other episode on, from my perspective, like why being a highly profitable business is actually morally superior to being an unprofitable business. I actually did a LinkedIn post about this, but what you've just described is that eloquently encapsulated. It's important. And so I wish we had more time, Tim, but you're a busy guy and I know you got to get going. So I want to make sure everybody understands where they should go if they want to learn more about you and benefit from a lot of the great resources that you publish and a lot of the incredible stuff you're doing inside your community.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my business is RevThink. So obviously my website is revthink.com. It's the best place to find us. You can find out some of our thinking, our process. You can join our community right there from the page. And our community has an online component to it as well. You can download the app and be part of our community on a daily basis. That dialogue is really great. The community really is just a feeder of all the other entrepreneurs just like you to begin the process of learning, feeling like you belong, and starting to understand what those problems are. Our one-on-one consulting, when we dive into those, we're often looking for people that are in a transition period, moving from one issue to another or adding these ingredients that they want that output to. Or they're looking for new output and coming up against a barrier that they can't get past. So we're just trying to help them like jump those barriers and get that work out there. So we often deal with studio owners on a one-on-one basis. And then lastly, we have accelerator programs. Accelerator programs are these great like group gatherings where we can choose one topic. Last year, we talked about a conversation around positioning yourself in a very clear way. We're using a secret sauce that everyone needs to differentiate themselves from the competitors. This year, we're diving straightly into a point of view of your business and your purpose. And recently, we've been dealing with just direct sales issues. So we have these small group classes that people do, 10-week courses that we get into. And mine is called Exactly How to Sell. I'm literally going week by week, how to use your CRM, get the work product out there, and so on. So those kind of issues that we're dealing with and seeing within the industry is kind of what we put together for RevThink and make available to you. If people want to just hear and more of the thought process, they can listen to the RevThinking podcast. And we had a handsome young entrepreneur recently that we interviewed on our entrepreneur podcast. This guy named Marcel. He's okay. But no, Marcel, you and I actually just recorded a couple of weeks ago the RevThinking podcast as well. And those are available just on any podcast app that you're using.
Oh, you know just what to say, Tim. So if you're listening and you're still listening after that, you can head to the show note links. Just scroll on down. We'll have links to RevThink, the podcast, the community, more information on consulting on the accelerators. And I encourage everyone to go check it out. Tim's the real deal. And with that, Tim, I really appreciate your time. And thank you for coming on the show today.
Are you kidding, Marcel? This is so much fun. Let's do it again sometime soon.
Sounds good. All right. See you soon.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've ever found yourself thinking, man, I get so much value from this podcast, I wish there was something I could do to return the favor. Well, today's your lucky day because you can leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, and it is incredibly helpful. Of course, if you haven't grabbed a free copy of the Agency Profit Toolkit, go and get that. It's got tons of free resources to help you improve your profitability. If you're looking to get in the fast lane and get help from experts to improve your profitability and measure your most important metrics, then apply for a consultation at Parakeeto.com. We'd love to chat with you and figure out how we can help. With all of that, thank you so much for being a listener, and we will see you on the next episode.